ahaya, ahaya, ahaya. Awenan, awenan, nan.
Ani, Bozo, Gelakasla, Chechahethlich. Before we begin today, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Putlach, Aikson, and the Comox, known as the Comox First Nations. We give thanks for the gift of living here and enjoying the blessings of this beautiful land in this place of the strong ancestral energy of these people. So today, we're here on Bear Spirit Place with Uncle David. And Uncle David is my uncle, but he's also Uncle David to many, many people in our community here in the Comox Valley. It is a term of respect that is used by our people when we are in the presence of someone who has been on a life journey and has received many, many teachings. So Uncle David, could you tell me and tell us about your life journey and who and what has shaped you to who you are today?
The first 8 years of my life are the foundation of how I've lived in the world. I was raised by my grandmother, who was a traditional Mohawk healing woman, and her and other elder Mohawk women were the center of my universe for that first 8 years. My grandfather played something of the role. He was a settler man. What I remember most of my grandfather, he had an incredible relationship with the cows and with the horses. His ability to communicate with them. He didn't even have to speak sometimes and they would respond. But my grandmother and the other elder women, they immersed me in the principles and values and traditions that are the foundation of indigenous cultures worldwide, going back thousands of years, that sacred spiritual relationship with all life. We're all related. So when we say all my relations, I learned very young, I'm talking about all my relations, every bit of life. I learned that it's impossible for me to be alone in the forest. Even if I'm the only human there, I have the trees and the other plants, the insects, the microorganisms, the birds, the animals. The forest for me, because of those early teachings, has always been a safe place. After I was taken away, adults were not safe. Until I was taken away, my grandmother and the elder women and my grandfather, they actually lived the teachings. There was no conflict between the things that I learned from them and how they lived in the world. I mean, from today's perspective, we'd say they role modeled the teachings. After I was taken away, I began hearing adults say, "Do as I say, not as I do." And of course, that's never made any sense to me. So I was taken away in August of 1944. World War II was still doing its thing. I have no idea how that came about, but I have suspicions that my birth mother's siblings played a role. My father, who's Mohawk, was in the military during the war and was stationed to the West Coast. And I think the fact that he was no longer in Southern Ontario gave them the chance to do whatever they did. But they weren't willing to look after me. So I was rotated through a series of what I call ad hoc foster homes. And none of them were safe places for kids. So I learned about childhood trauma, not from books, but firsthand. And when I was 10, I don't know how the arrangements were made, but I was put on a train in Toronto to travel on my own across the land 4 days and 5 nights to New Westminster to live with my father and his second wife, who was Potawatomi. And she became my true mother. It's just the way it worked out in my life. My father was full of rage because of the prejudice he'd experienced, and there was a lot of violence. Mother was in denial of her true self because of the prejudice she'd experienced, and by that time I was a child of trauma. So we were a pretty mixed up family, to put it mildly. So in terms of my life journey, from the time I was taken away in August of 1944 until I began my personal healing journey in the fall of '63, I call those my turbulent years. I quit school in September of 1954, just the beginning of grade 12, so I never completed high school. And between then and I began my healing journey, I had two main occupations. First, I worked as a logger in northern Vancouver Island, and I was in the military for 5 years. And in both instances, my closest friends, most of them were First Nation people. I remember arriving in the first logging camp, and I was ended up in the Indian bunkhouse. I was with Stolo men. It was the first time since I was taken away that I was with people that I actually fit in with. It was a coming home. It was really interesting. They were all residential school survivors. That's where I first learned about residential school. But those early teachings would surface here and there. And who's to say how it works, you know? It's all a mystery. It's almost like the spiritual energy of my grandmother and those elder women have been shaping and influenced me and making sure I don't mess up too badly. So it was quite a journey. In 1963, I actually connected with a wisdom keeper who was one of those who kept cultural knowledge alive when it wasn't safe to do so. And with him as my mentor, I began my healing journey. And we'd go up into the mountains. We'd put together a rather small, crude sweat lodge. We would do ceremony in secret. He would share teachings. And what began to happen is the early teachings from my grandmother and the elder women began to surface from wherever they've been hiding within me. And it was interesting because I was given to my grandmother when I was an infant, because Mohawk wise wisdom, who had the gift of reading the gift of children, identified one of my primary major gifts was that of healing, and she was a healing woman. That's why I was given to her. In 1967, I learned about something called Mature Student Program. And that Mature Student Program meant that I could go to university without completing high school. So I went to Simon Fraser University because they had the semester system, and you could go through 1.5 years of university every 12 months. And here another mystery. I graduated from Simon Fraser in 1970. And that's the year that the federal government initiated the policy of turning control of First Nation lives back to First Nation people. And the first of our organizations to take over a program of services for our own people was the Manitoba Indian Brotherhood. And I was a member of that original staff team. And as a result of that, throughout the 70s, I got to spend a lot of time in isolated communities, in communities close to community. I worked for the Caribou Tribal Council, so out in the Chilcotin, the Southern Carrier people, the Salish people. So I was able to learn from wisdom keepers from a group of tribes from Quebec, basically to the west coast and as far north as Churchill, plus at many gatherings. And it's just deepened and deepened and deepened my ability to be in accord with the way our ancestors lived and still function in this mainstream culture, which has never made any sense to me because, you know, as Granny Hawk of Oxford House said, those old women ruined you. I started laughing, and she says, she says, you know what I meant. And of course, what she meant is I've never fit in, but I still had to learn to function in it. And the learning continues. You know, as I tell some of the youth I work with, you know, for all I've done and how long I've lived, I still know only a little. And that's our tradition. You keep learning, you can keep blossoming and growing. Yeah.
Thank you. So as I sit here and look around this beautiful place, the Bear Spirit Place, can you tell us the journey of coming to Bear Spirit Place and what was that like for you and how this transformation has helped you in your own life?
Well, the circumstances that we could spend a lot of time on, the main thing is in October of 1986, old man, I actually remember what year it was, I was called here by the spirits of the land, and there was what we call a medicine event happened with 3 deer, and deer that big don't grow on Vancouver Island. They're up at the top of the slope there. Now this was a moonscape of raw gravel. These trees weren't here. This was just a moonscape of raw gravel, and I was called to move here and dance with the spirits of the land in the healing of the land. I can remember in November, and actually I lived in a mobile that first winter. The house was built over and around the mobile in 1987. But I remember looking down over this moonscape of raw gravel and saying, great mystery, I'm not sure about this. So it's been a journey. The first couple of years it was coming into relationship with the spiritual energy of the land and allowing the land to reveal what has to happen and where it has to happen. And it's been a good teaching, because every time I used my intellect to do something, it had to be done over again. Every time I paid attention to what the land revealed, it's been fine. So I really wanted to raise a sweat lodge, because the sweat lodge is an important aspect of my journey, healing, transformation, connection with earth, water, air, and fire, these ceremonies. And these are ancient ceremonies found in indigenous cultures worldwide. But where to raise a sweat lodge? And so I moved here in the fall of '86. It was March of 1991 that I was first revealed. And this area here is very powerful healing energy, more powerful than other parts. And these trees are natural regeneration from raw gravel in 33 years. And you can just get in this sense of the power here. I've had people arrive here, get out of their cars and just stop and wonder. They don't even know what it is. They're feeling it. And so the very first lodge was revealed in March of '91, and it was meant to be just a small lodge for my own use. But very shortly thereafter, I was revealed by a spirit world that I was supposed to open the door of the lodge and do healing work with ceremonies for the people, which created a problem. My birth tribe is Mohawk. This is not my territory. But I had met a hereditary chief, and I went to him and communicated with him with my concerns, and he said, oh, I'll come out and I'll do a dedication lodge ceremony. So he came out and the two of us went in and he conducted the ceremony. He prayed to his ancestors to support me in the work I was doing, and if we had all day, there were some medicine things happened about that we could spend a lot of time on. But one of them was, I learned from him in that ceremony that the Kwakiutl people give names to just about everything. And he gave me two names, Wagalus, which is rainbow, Kwahwina, which is raven. Now, the very first one of my major spirit helpers revealed to my grandmother when I was a little boy was Raven. So I really wanted to call it Raven, but I have concerns that I don't pronounce it quite right. So I wrestled with that for about a week. And I was out on the driveway there looking at the lodge, and I thought, oh, I'll call it Wagalus. And in seconds, two ravens come out of the northwest and began their tumbling dance that they usually do up high, but they're only about 20 feet above me. I'm sitting there with my mouth open, and I said, okay, Kwahwina. As soon as I said that, they left. That is the kind of medicine event, when we live in accord, things happen. And the deeper I have come on this, I've had some incredible experiences, including things that, according to the science of Newton, are not possible. And some of them I'll share with, like what's happening with a couple of the youth. But one that happened that possibly I'd like to share. There used to be lots of swallows here. By this time of year, there'd be swallows all over. And 5 or 6 years ago, the swallows didn't show up. So in sunrise pipe ceremony and day closing pipe ceremony, I was praying for the swallows. And it was late May, and I was just coming around the council house, and two swallows came swooping down, and one of them came right up, that close to my face, chattering, and then they were gone. Now, I don't claim to know what that was about, but I suspect that little swallow was giving gratitude for those prayers. I've never heard anyone have a swallow come that close to their face and flutter in front of them like that. And I think it's important to know that this is a human blessing. When we live in accord with the life force, things happen. And it's a heritage of every human on the planet that's got lost. And we're in trouble because of that, and we can talk more about that. And so I've never brought in soil. I bring in organic matters, bring them on the land, and because it's on the slope, the main garden, they're in steps. And I've allowed the land to reveal it to me. The first winter I got a good deal on about 400 bales of mulch hay, and that was the beginning of soil. And the earthworms and the microorganisms and the fungi, they transformed that into soil. The first 10 years I was here, I cleaned out a sheep barn every spring, which the sheep farmer was happy to have me do. And it gave me the ingredients for soil to happen. My neighbors here have horses, and I get horse manure from them on a regular basis. I get seaweed, whatever, and I now have a very fertile garden. I grow, with the exception of bananas and avocados, I grow all the produce I eat in a year, and my excess produce I gifted. That's in our tradition. I've never had a big hang-up for money. I know it's got to roll, and it's important. I've actually, I'll just share this briefly. I was consultant to the Manitoba Ministry of Education on a particular consultation. I was wrapping up my consultation in the fall of '77. And I was being made all these highfalutin offers, including in Ottawa, and I sure did not want to go to Ottawa. The National Indian Brotherhood had a gathering in Winnipeg, and a Chilcotin chief was sharing with me how they'd got in trouble with their administration, and Indian Affairs was threatened to take their administration back, and he asked if I'd be their band manager at half the salary. I figured, well, that's where I'm needed. I wrote up my final report, I moved back to Williams Lake, and I became band manager. And there's a whole bunch of stories around that, because I'd actually worked for the Caribou Tribal Council 2 years earlier, so Indian Affairs, they didn't want to mess with me, so I had free rein to do what I needed to do.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is that the values that were instilled in you when you were younger stayed with you and helped to guide you to make those kind of decisions, you know, when it came down to service for the people, being the helper for the people versus, you know, a career and or.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, service. I once had a fantasy when I was getting really tired of moving to the Charlottes, finding an isolated area and live the life of a hermit. And then I thought, my mentors will haunt me. And you have a responsibility. I heard that a lot. Yes. So yeah, service for the people, it's really important. As I was sharing with you earlier this morning, I mean, it's one thing if I'm working and I have a salary, but I'm a registered clinical counselor and a traditional healing person. And if I'm doing mainstream therapy or our traditional things, I stopped having a fee schedule 30 some odd years ago. It's just whatever is gifted. I remember the first time I got a call from South Laleham Healing Center. They wanted me to come down and work with all the clients. This is over 20 years ago, while they were going through an accreditation process. So Charles says, "What is your fee?" I said, "Charles, whatever is gifted." And there was silence for about a minute. He said, "Does that mean you'll still come?" And they've got used to it now. But again, I'm in keeping with what I learned, in accord. You know, I've got enough.
You do, yeah.
Yeah.
So in that light of being of service, I've witnessed you, and I know that you do a lot of helping work with people, particularly young people in our community. And so what do you feel are the teachings that you've seen and witnessed that young people are drawn to and resonate with? What are those teachings?
Well, in a general sense, the most powerful ones, and I've seen some incredible examples, are touching the earth. Being out on the land and beginning to learn in that spiritual relationship. But there's another thing, especially because most of the youth, whether they're First Nation or not, that I work with, have trauma in their lives. And they're taught they're not worthy. So I emphasize over and over with you all have dignity, you all are worthy. And I keep emphasizing and reinforcing that. And teaching stories as well. And I'll usually, one of the things I share with them is don't get stuck on the symbol, you'll miss the teaching, because teaching stories use symbolic language. And a lot of people get stuck in the symbol and they miss the teaching. So I always emphasize that. And there's 3 sisters that I worked with from the time they were in their early teens. They spent most of their life in foster care. Every session I've had with them, wherever, because they heard the Journey of Jumping Mouse the first time I was with them. "Uncle David, can we have the Journey of the Mouse again?" And actually, they're now young mothers. They're all young women now. And the one twin asked me if I would actually write the story out so she could read it to her little girl. And I said, Emily, you should know it by heart. But that story has resonated for so many youth because there's so many important teachings in it about being in the court and about the life journey and your own dignity and worthiness, your creativity, your natural gifts, and really emphasizing that with young people. And that connection with the earth can have profound consequences for youth. There's one youth group from Campbell River I work with, and every June, except this June apparently, we take them to the Dimkish Valley and we take them down into the Houston Caves, and they have that relationship, and then we go to Annetts Lake for lunch. And Annetts Lake actually is the first logging camp. It's not a logging camp anymore, but in the 50s it was a logging camp. That was my first logging camp. We knew this one girl was really troubled, and we were concerned that she was suicidal. She showed up the day we went to the caves. And where we take them down, the stream flows into the caves. And she sat down on a large stone, and you could see she was becoming one with the stream. It was just, and the other youth, they didn't bother them. You could actually almost feel the energy between her and the stream. She's been fine ever since. She has that relationship. She's able to function. She was really struggling, and it doesn't mean that there's not still struggles, but she's able to dance with those struggles now. That's one of the more powerful experiences I've seen of that relationship. I had another very shy girl from Namgis come to me very quietly and say, Uncle David, I have 2 trees. They're my closest friends, and whenever I'm troubled, I can just go talk with them, and I'm okay now. And so those are some of the touching the earth teachings of examples.
Yes, thank you for that. It's very hopeful, and it's very it's full of light for me when you speak like that and speak about that. So in light of where we are today and what young people might be wondering about, worrying about, stressing about our world situation, I've heard you tell the story of the journey of becoming a true human, and teachings like that. What can you say to the youth of today about this journey?
Well, we got several days. Basic teaching, and I've used the term touching the earth. Again, what is my relationship with all life? Do I have a respectful relationship with all life? Those principles and values that are a foundation of indigenous culture, which is the heritage of every human on the planet. Primary principle is respect, generosity, not only physical generosity, but spiritual generosity, which is service. Courage, especially the courage to stand in the truth. Integrity, there's no conflict between my words and my behavior. Compassion and kindness, and they're all woven together with the energy of love for all life. Sacred spiritual relationship with all life. Recognizing that life feeds on life. In order for me to eat, other beings of creation have to live their life and be transformed through death to become the food that I eat. Do I respect those lives? Do I honor those lives? Our ancestors sure did. Or am I aware of the lives that are being transformed? Do I have that connection? And there's another related teaching, and the first time I heard this, I went, whew. Perfection is the domain of the great mystery. Our domain as members of the human family is excellence. And the beauty of excellence, I can deepen my ability to be excellent at what I'm doing, being in sacred relationship, respectful relationship with all life. Now, one of the ancient teachings is called the journey of becoming a true human. It's probably expressed in many days. You know, each language and even in clans, they'll express the same teaching in different ways. Same storyteller will tell it differently in each different ways. But I always liked it, the journey of becoming a true human. And in a healthy world with healthy people, it begins with your first breath, ends with your last breath, and there's no God it made. It's a deepening. And I was at a gathering called Nanakoa in the 90s. This one was in Albuquerque. And Nanakoa was Native American children of alcoholics, and those were powerful, powerful gatherings. And this Navajo woman gave an imagery of the journey of becoming a true human. She said, you know, a river, even the biggest river, starts way up in the mountains as a little stream. And that's when we're a child. As it flows toward the ocean, other streams come in and join it. And those are mentors who come into our life to help us on our journey. And there are places on the way to the ocean where there's rapids and there's falls, and those represent difficulties we have in our life. But that river keeps flowing. Do we keep flowing? And when it gets close to the ocean, that river is wider and it's deeper. The current isn't as fast, but it's stronger. The deepening, deepening, deepening. And then it flows into the ocean and it's no longer a river. And that's when our spiritual energy leaves the flesh and goes back into the great river of creation. And she said, you know, that river doesn't stop flowing part way to the ocean and say, I'm a river now, I got it made, I can stop flowing. And yet we see a lot of people in the world figure they got it made. I love that teaching, and imageries for me and for a lot of the youth especially, if they can have an imagery to go with the teaching, it really helps. Yeah, that imagery.
Yeah, thank you for that. And for myself personally, I see that story of the journey of becoming a true human in this time where we find ourselves living, is that I am in this river and I will flow with the river, and I know that it's a time of great change and transformation. So I want to thank you so much for your teachings and allowing us to come here to Bear Spirit Place and spend this time with you, and Chimiigwech, all my relations.
Ahaya, 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 ahaya.